With that, I will call the November 29th, 2023 BPAC meeting to order. Brandon, could you do the roll call?
Yes. Chair Kuzma.
Present.
Vice Chair Stone. Absent. Member Barton.
Present.
Member Fenwick.
Present.
Member Automac.
Here.
We have 4 members present. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. With that, we will move to item 3, oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and state law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agendized items. Do we have any public commenters in the room? If you do, please move to the left turn. Evidently not. Brandon, do we have any online public comment?
Yes, we do. We have one. Bruce England, I'm going to click to allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself and you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Brandon. Just a couple of things. Bruce England, Wisman Station Drive. There was a Council Transportation Committee meeting last night, and I encourage everyone to, if you weren't at the meeting, to give a listen to it or watch it online. There were some interesting topics in there, including the speed limit topic, which is very important to a lot of people, the prospects for lowering speed limits with AB 43 in mind, and the 85th percentile rules and things like that. I'll leave my comment at that without editorializing. And then something that just came up in our active transportation Slack channel, somebody pointed out that there's a lack of sidewalks where Moffett Boulevard and 85 intersect. I actually did not realize that myself. And I'm curious, I'm going to say this is a question. I realize you can't really answer it, but I'll put it out there anyway. That should be addressed. And I wonder if it should be addressed in the active transportation plan, the proposed Moffett Boulevard precise plan, or neither, or both. So I'll just leave that question out there. And that's all I got for now. Thank you.
Do we have additional public comment?
Just a second. No.
All right. With that, we will close item 3 and we'll move to item 4.1, approving the meeting minutes for October 25th, 2023. Do we have any public comment on the meeting minutes approval? Any online? Nope. All right, with that, a motion would be in order.
I'm Valerie. I reviewed the minutes. They seem complete and accurate. I would like to move for their approval.
Make a second for that motion.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Not seen any. That's all the 4 present members voted in favor. With that, we will close item 4.1 minutes approval. We have no unfinished business, so we will move on to item 6.1, the pavement management plan. And I believe we have a staff presentation.
I'm Robert Gonzalez. I'm the principal civil engineer in the civil infrastructure group. So I'll be providing an update on the city's paving program today. For my outline, I'll cover the pavement condition categories, the network condition, pavement investment planning, how we select our segments for treatment. We'll go over PCI by neighborhood, as well as the pavement striping program and the sidewalk program. So the last 2 we haven't really talked in depth about, so we'll go into a little bit more detail on those. I realize that you guys have seen this before, but for the folks at home, we'll run through the whole program. The pavement condition categories from excellent down to the bottom of the page to poor condition. A brand new, newly paved pavement section is 100. It deteriorates rather quickly from there to about 95. So 95 is really like what people would experience if you were to walk down Castro last week, for example. And then we've got going down by 10s from there: good, fair, at risk, poor, and failed. And depending on where we sit, where a pavement section lands on this grading chart, depends on really dictates how we treat the payment, what treatment we choose to go forward with. So every 2 years, we have an agreement with the Metropolitan Transit Commission. All Bay Area agencies have an agreement. They essentially offer pavement services for network condition assessment. So it's an opportunity for us to leverage the work that MTC does and essentially get a consultant on board every 2 years to evaluate our network PCI. So they will drive every single street and they'll evaluate representative segments and they'll score each one. So the map on the right is essentially, it's a couple of years old now because we are actively in the evaluation program now. But the last time we did this, that was the result of the network PCI, the yellow being at risk, green being good, and orange being poor, red being failed. So there's a few elements in red, but for the most part, it's green and yellow. The current network PCI is 70. We expect that there's going to be a dip in that over the pandemic. We lost a couple of years of actually doing pavement programs, and we're catching up very quickly. So we're hoping that the investments that we didn't lose those. We're going to deliver a lot of those this year and next year. So we're going to see a lot of activity over the next couple of years to catch that back up. But we do expect that to be in the high 60s and then move from there. So in terms of where we are now with the most recent pavement assessment, we've got a consultant on board currently. They've been doing the field work to work on all of the network. And so we're anticipating that field work will be done in the next few months. They have some economic analysis they look at from there. So they basically feed that into a street saver database for the city, update the network there, and then they run some economic analyses to determine what the required investment would be to essentially maintain where we are now with the PCI, whatever that is, increase it by 5 PCI over a 5-year period, or to, I guess the intent here is to really get an economic sense of what it would take to actually bring the entire network up to 100. So you kind of get a benchmark of your investment needs for the city. So we report that out to council. We can share that with you when it comes forward. But that gives us a guideline to go back and look at not just street segments, but the investment need that the city needs to make. Last spring, we shared with the city council that the current investment that we have in the pavement management program is underinvested. So we invest about $5 million a year to maintain the current PCI. We expect that should be around $10 million per year. And to see it move forward from there, it's really another $5 million on top of that. So we do have some reinvestment to do and some tough choices, because all the pavement management, well, much of the pavement is locally funded. We get some state funding, we get some regional funding. It's a mix of funding mechanisms, but a lot of that is supported by local funding as well. This is a key diagram for us to use during our investment planning. The bottom axis, the x-axis, is time in years, and the y-axis is the pavement conditions we showed earlier, excellent being on the top. So what this tells us is that there is a very predictable S-curve in terms of deterioration, where you get a lot of good quality years at the beginning of a pavement cycle. So a pavement section should last you, a fresh one should last you 5 to 10 years without a lot of deterioration. And after that 10-year period, you see a rapid decline in condition. So that tracks pretty well. This is done by AASHTO and several other academic universities use the same S-curve. So we use this to decide how much we're going to invest in the pavement and how. And generally, the guiding principle here is paving the good streets as a maintenance effort is much more cost effective than turning around and waiting for those to deteriorate. So the first effort you do in pavement management is you maintain the good streets in a good condition. So sometimes that feels a little counterintuitive for somebody, resident, when they see two streets, one that is in reasonably good shape and it's getting a slurry seal versus the one, you know, in the same neighborhood that can be in worse condition, and that one is not getting a treatment. And a lot of it comes back to this graph where you can invest a lot of money upfront and maintain those streets that the city's already invested in. And then while you're doing that with additional funds, anything left over, you invest in those streets that are further down on the curve. So in our last update, the last time we did the network evaluation, at the staff level, we basically assigned every single street segment to a neighborhood, so we could really evaluate if there are any pockets of the city, any areas of the city that are not being invested in or are under investing. So this is another guidance for us to really get a sense of where the investments have been in the past and where we should be investing in the future. So you can see that the North Bay Shore was falling behind. There's a few projects that are already in the works that are already planned for the North Bay Shore that should catch that up to closer to 70. And the other ones do seem like they're in a very tight range. The difference between 70 and 73 is almost academic. Like this is subject to investigator or whoever's doing the evaluation. They're doing it by essentially a few measurements that they do. They'll go out there and they'll measure a pothole. They'll go out there and they'll measure the linearity of cracks in the pavement, and then they do that assessment for the entire section. So I would say that most of the neighborhoods are in a very tight range. So it tells us that we're investing properly. From here, what we've done in our team is actually to identify specific areas of neighborhoods and invest in those on an annual basis. So for example, if we have a street maintenance program that's coming up, we'll select a neighborhood, invest heavily in that neighborhood, and then rotate that through the city. So we're touching with our different paving CIPs, maybe 2 to 3 neighborhoods per year, and then we'll see a rotation through on like a 5-year cycle based on the neighborhood. So we also have a pavement striping program. So in the past, we've delivered these as a standalone project. So we had a standalone CIP where we refreshed our striping. More recently, we've been delivering this with our paving projects. So where we have a paving project in a neighborhood, we'll identify areas in that same area that need some refreshed paving refreshed striping on top of that. So we'll do it both ways. Staff is exploring the best practices so that we keep up the striping program along with the paving program. One of the things that we're doing most recently is the city is investing in a database called Blue Dome. Blue Dome is a company that will drive the neighborhoods and put into a relational database all the signage and striping on that neighborhood. So regulatory signs like stop signs, yield signs have fairly recent retro reflectivity requirements. So having Blue Dome as a third party assess all of those, put it into a database, gives us a lot of valuable information as a city so that we can maintain regulatory compliance, but also see if there's any other issues that we need assessing or fixing. So for example, if a street sign is missing, if it was broken, we can track that and we can make sure that we're investing enough to catch all of those things and bring those up to speed. That same database will be able to include striping evaluation as well. So stop bars, signage, yield, and stop ledgers. Those sorts of things can also go into that database. So it's a way for us to track and then invest where we need to for that striping program. And then the sidewalk repair program. So currently the practice is complaint driven. So staff themselves can see something that needs to be fixed either ahead of a paving project or as we're going out there assessing things. And often these things are complaint driven. So the city's webpage the sidewalks get a lot of attention through the Ask MV process, and we put those into a database, we put those into a file. And then the next time we're doing an annual sidewalk investment program, we'll take those out and we'll correct those. The city manager's office is leading an update to the city's Americans with Disabilities Act self-evaluation and transition plan. So our current transition plan is slightly out of date. We want to bring that up to date. City manager's office has a consultant on board. They brought them on board in September. And part of that work will be essentially a citywide network evaluation of all of our sidewalks, and that'll include curb ramps. So that'll include sidewalk conditions as they relate to accessibility guidelines. So that means they're evaluating for cracks, they're evaluating for slope issues. So we'll get results of that. We're anticipating those next year. We don't have a schedule yet because that consultant is just getting on board now. But as soon as that gets kicked off and we get more information, we can certainly, we'll post that on the webpage, and we'll be using that as a template, as a guidepost for our future sidewalk improvement programs. So that's what I have for today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any other questions?
Valerie here. I have, I know, I feel like just for the recording, I need to say my name, even though I do have a name tag.
I think it's helpful, so.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I have two questions, and it sounds like maybe this is complaint driven, but I'm just for the clarification. I know you mentioned like Farley Rock, there's another street in there that makes it probably Montebello, I think, or whatever. It's a pretty big area. But I know I live in Rex Manor off of Farley. Farley is like a thoroughfare, has been repaved, I think, twice since I lived in the neighborhood in the last 16 years. Other side streets have not been repaved. And it's, so it sounds like, you know, when I see a score for a neighborhood, I wonder, like, does staff have data on like pockets? Like I would expect like Farley or Rock Street, like those bigger streets probably have more use and therefore more wear and tear. And do you have that type of data as well?
So we have a lot of that data. So each street segment in each street is categorized as either an arterial, collector, or a residential street. So the definitions are pretty by the book. The residential streets are your neighborhood streets that feed into something that maybe serves a larger community, feeds into a collector that moves into an arterial. Arterials are our large streets like our Shorelines and our Ringsdorfs. And for example, Middlefield might be a minor arterial. And then it goes down from there. So yes, we have a lot of information on the Street Saver database, which is run by MTC, on the category of the street, as well as the square footage of the street. We don't really track the number of trips per street, but it's probably not necessary for this. Really, what you want an assessment of the paving condition every two to 3 years. With that snapshot every 2 to 3 years, we can see the degradation, and based on where it is on that curve, we can identify when it's best to invest in that street. We try to hit a lot of different streets, not just arterials, not just collectors or residential neighborhood streets. We try to hit a lot of those, so it's equitable across the neighborhood. It's equitable across the city, but it really is driven more on the conditions so that we don't lose value as we drop steeply on that curve. So I'm guessing that if Farley was invested in, say, in the 90s or the early 2000s, and those treatments are to maintain it as a good condition street, and the other ones need to catch up to that. So I would have to look at the exact condition to figure out like what exactly is going on in that neighborhood. But that's generally how our assessment would play out.
I guess to be a little more specific, like the question, it sounds like you do have this data. You might have different scores for a specific street within a neighborhood.
Right, yeah.
So like that, a more busy street might have a different like that average score, like I saw for that neighborhood was like 72 or something.
Yeah.
But you would know, the city would know, one or two streets might be at a 55 and really
That's correct.
need help. Okay, and so you have that. And then my second clarifying question was, and this may tie in, you were mentioning Blue Dome Company.
Mhm.
Will that also, is that gonna be the same company or a different method for collecting data on, it sounds like for ADA compliance with our sidewalks? And I also, second part of that question is, will it also be used to help identify sidewalk gaps?
Like the one that was alluded to earlier in the public comment? Yes, it can. So the Blue Dome assessment and the ADA assessment done by the city manager's office will essentially evaluate the sidewalks that are there. We'll have to go into I'll have to go into the consultant's scope of work and evaluate if they actually identify sidewalk gaps, but the city knows a lot of those already. So between the transportation group and the civil infrastructure group, we've identified a lot of those. And actually we are actively moving towards filling some of those gaps. So as we get transportation funds and as we identify those areas, we can fill in those gaps. The one on Moffett Boulevard specifically, we got a federal grant last year for Moffett Boulevard Complete Streets project. I think you guys were supportive of that project when it came before the BPAC last year. That went through city council and we're receiving that grant. So that's actually just moving into design now. We're bringing on a consultant in 2024 and going through design. And so as part of the Moffett Boulevard Complete Streets, we'll be filling that sidewalk gap. But more strategically, the city and the public works staff knows where those sidewalk gaps are, and we look at opportunities to fill those. The other related policy to that is our unimproved streets policy. So that policy, we need to look at that in relation to where those streets are. So some of the streets in the city were received by the city as unimproved streets from the county. And those may have more challenges. They might not have lighting. They might not have curb and gutter. They might not have sidewalk in gaps. So those have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. But the one on Moffett, for example, it's almost like a monolith. It's from 85 all the way up to
Past couple. Or no, technically Ameswell.
yes, all the way to the next intersection. Leland, thank you. Leon, yes.
Thank you, that answers my questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I had a couple questions about the gap. So one was in the clarifying question. So we have asphalt surface, we have gutter pan, and we have sidewalk. We talked about sidewalks, we talked about gaps in sidewalks. We didn't talk about gutter pans. What's the maintenance there and what's the criteria? Because I think reference on Ringsdorf was a 2 or 3 inch uplift. Assume the pipes work okay, the gutter still drains. It's just a hazard for someone walking or riding their bike, potentially even driving that close. I don't think it's actually a bike lane. So pavement looks fine, but it's actually not an effective transportation network. How do we address those?
So those are addressed, actually, we can assess those through both of those programs. So for example, if a pavement section is identified for improvement, for a slurry seal, for an improvement beyond maintenance, for example, a grind and overlay or a reconstruction, we would be looking at all of the improvements from curb to curb. So if there is a problem with the gutter pan in those locations, Miramonte is a good example. That'll be something that gets a grind and overlay. Those gutter pans would be assessed at that point, and if there's problems, they would be replaced. It would be improved.
So I guess if, let's say, Ringsdorf was repaved 10 years ago, it may be 15 before it's actually run down. Remain for another 15 years.
So that's one example is the paving program. The other example that we would get is through the Ask MV, where in the same complaint-driven process that the sidewalks are assessed. An individual could report out on an uplift in a gutter And that could be assessed and delivered through the sidewalk program as well. So if we go out there and we see that there's a gutter pan issue, we can see if there's a way to address that through the sidewalk program. The sidewalk in that area may be fine, but it also may be experiencing uplift.
That's fine. I reported it 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Okay,
The fix they did was adding a little lump. It lasted about 6, 8 months, and it's been getting progressively worse through tree uplift. For the last.
yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So the first thing that the city will do is evaluate if it's appropriate to do a maintenance fix, like concrete shaving. You can send somebody out there as a maintenance if you have a less than 1/4 inch uplift, you can shave that off and you can maintain a fairly smooth flow in the gutter, and on a sidewalk, you can get rid of some of those offsets. That becomes undoable after a while, and it becomes more of a
It's too big to shave back 5 years ago.
Yeah, so an
It was-
improvement
they had
needs to
little
be made.
asphalt to make a launch ramp, I guess. So it sounds like we should just monthly put in new asphalt views on that location.
I would love to see those.
The other question was, again, on going through the cracks, is there something Blue Dome could do for trails, paved trails?
I have not reached out to Blue Dome and asked them specifically about what they could do for paved trails. Blue Dome is the one that it's going through and looking for signage primarily, and taking a database of signage and not really looking for those cracks.
Yeah, I
those
guess I'm looking for
tidbits.
consistency. If they're doing signage, can we do
Fair.
signage on trails?
Yeah.
If they're doing pavement, can we do pavement on trails?
Yeah, so that would be something that we would go back and we would talk to Blue Dome about. We were intentional in, like, this is the first time we're using Blue Dome, and we want to get them. The priority was the regulatory signs. And based on available budget, we snuck in the signage and the striping in that contract. So we would go back to Blue Dome if we're happy with their performance, and then reevaluate whether we want to add trails to that contract. Same way we would do that when we do the 2 to 3 year assessment through MTC, and we do the pavement assessment. If we're happy with that contractor, we can contract with them to do additional efforts. So for example, this year, we're paying them additional funding to go out and assess all of our parking lots. So all the city lots, whether it's attached to a park or the library, are getting an assessment for paving condition, so that we can establish a need, identify how much we need to bring all of those paving up to improvement, including ADA improvements. And then develop a program for the paving, for the parking lots as well.
Because my interest is in just seeing all the,
Yeah.
at least on the data side, all the transportation network being, whether it's walk, bike, vehicle being treated consistently.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And Public Works and Community Services do work together, and we sit down together and look at those investments on a regular basis. And there is a need, we recognize that, for trail maintenance and trail improvements. So getting that assessment is important to us. So I appreciate that.
And I guess the other aspect of the clarifying question was on funding. Could you describe the sources of funding that restrict work to only vehicle roadways versus trails? And said it seems like roads are maintained better than the current trail maintenance. I'd like to understand what, where how we can get better trail maintenance effectively.
Yeah, so the ones that come to mind immediately: vehicle licensing fees, gas tax, and SB1, which is a state levy also on gas stations. Those are all restricted to paving public roads. We can't even do sidewalks or parking lots with that. Those need to be part of the public roadway. On top of that, I'm not thinking, Ed Arango is looking up the CIP as we speak. The other large one that the city contributes to is the CIP reserve, but that has more flexibility. So that could be used for trail maintenance. The ones that are restrictive are the ones that are from regional funding or from state funding.
Hi, thanks for having me, committee. Ed Arango, Assistant Public Works Director. To speak to the transportation funds, these are funds that are focused on transportation projects and what the restrictions are. So Principal Engineer Gonzalez mentioned a couple of them already. The gas tax fund, which is focused on maintenance of road repairs. The Senate Bill 1, also another tax and excise tax for on diesel and gasoline as well, is restricted to roadway payment. The vehicle license fee that he mentioned, that is also, again, restricted to roadway payment. There's a VTA Measure B sales tax as well, also allocated for local street and the roadway program, really meant for the repair and maintenance of ongoing road program. So those are the main ones that have the restrictions. When we get into unrestricted funds, there's one more transportation fund, which is in the general fund, there's a transportation reserve. And so the use of funds, because there's so much demand, and you've heard Robert mentioned just the needs out there, and there's so much infrastructure that needs to be maintained. There's a lot of demand on these funds. And there isn't enough funds in order to support the existing infrastructure, just for the roadway maintenance. So when we look at other funds, we go to unrestricted funds. So then we look at construction and conveyance tax and our CIP reserve, that we can use other fund sources in order to fund other sidewalk maintenance, et cetera. But those aren't the only needs on the unrestricted funds, because we also use those funds for city buildings and facility repairs. The city owns and maintains a mountain of city facilities and remodels, expansions, just general maintenance that we have. And so those unrestricted funds, that's the dedicated source for those types of facility improvements. We also use unrestricted funds for IT projects, supplementing, as I mentioned, transportation funds. And that's where a lot of the bike and ped improvement projects get funded. If it's a dedicated bike ped improvement project, that's their unrestricted source.
I guess what I'm asking is, can we reduce the unrestricted funds going to roads and bring up the level of trails? I would guess our CI, the index on trails is, let's say, 50%. So it's far below the level of roads. Can we take out the unrestricted funds from roads, let the roads come down from whatever average they are now, bring the trails up so we're all at 65 or whatever, rather than 70 and 50 or something? It seems our priorities don't align, given the significant priorities of the city are to have an active transportation network and a sustainable environment. We seem to be welded into kind of historic ways of funding. And I guess the question is, what's it take to change that?
So the CIP, the unrestricted funds, there's very little use of unrestricted funds for roadway maintenance because we have all these funding sources. And there's a council policy to target as a PCI target of 75. And as Robert mentioned, we're averaging 70. So we're below the target. So it would be a council policy to make a shift that says there is no longer a policy to obtain a PCI target of 75, and then we're going to shift and have a new target. So we would get direction from council on that.
Well, I'd be happy with the trail target of 75. I guess I just want to make sure trails are included in the same transportation network because they are pavement.
I think we understand that, and so the trails are a part of the ongoing community services department's maintenance budget, which also uses unrestricted funds to pull from in order to maintain the parks and the park trails.
So it sounds like council would be swayed if we had a true pavement index for trails, which would say trails are down here, streets are down here, they're both used. We should increase the development funds available to trails to get that network a little more equitable, as we're trying to do with neighborhoods.
It sounds like a comment.
Yes, well, we've been straight into commentary. I was going to actually ask, following on to that, what would be the best place to look to understand like what things are funding what parts of the pavement management program, or what funds are going to are funding that of, like the various restricted funds, like the licensing fees, the gas taxes, the portion of VTA Measure B that funds local roads versus stuff that's coming from the CIP reserve or other sources.
So we have a couple of documents. We're very transparent on our
Yes.
funding sources. And we're
So many
we're-
documents, it's hard to look through.
So much to look at. There's a lot to read. If you're interested in reading, there's a lot of information. I'm looking at the March 28th, 2023 study session that we went to council on. That outlines all the information about all the funding sources in March 28th, 2023. It's our fiscal year CIP program. We go through this process every year. And we provide this information as these are all our funding sources. These are the funding source categories, and these are the restrictions. And then as an educational effort. And then separately, when we establish our CIP, I have brought it with me too. When we establish our CIP program that has over 300 CIP projects. Within it, every year we identify the non-discretionary projects and annual street maintenance, concrete sidewalk repair, non-discretionary, which is ongoing. We're just gonna fund that every year. That we recommend council just approve annually. And then we have a separate discretionary project. These are brand new projects every single year. And the discretionary projects where council really does weigh in on whether or not to do those projects. In the CIP program document, which is available online, under discretionary project and non-discretionary projects, it identifies where the funding source is coming from. Every project has to be identified with a funding source. And right there, we identify if it's CC tax, construction and conveyance tax, SB1, Measure B, gas tax fund. It's all very transparent in here. So anybody can go through it. And we identify it for the projects that are getting funded for that year. So if you're looking for a project for 2 years ago, you have to go to that fiscal year budget to identify, how did we fund this? And you'll find it.
No, but it sounds like there are, I guess the question is, you mentioned that there are kind of, I don't know the word you just used, more automatic improvements for sidewalk and street maintenance.
Yeah, those are the non-discretionary projects, meaning, so council has full discretion on all projects. We really try to categorize the ongoing maintenance because there's so much infrastructure maintenance that we need on an ongoing annual basis. We just automatically fund every year annual street maintenance, sidewalk maintenance.
So I guess my question is, currently trails are not non-discretionary, I guess. How do we change that?
Right, so I'm looking at the, there's a biannual shoreline pathway, roadway, and infrastructure improvement project. So this one's biannual, non-discretionary, so every other year it gets funded, just to look at that. There's also a Parks Pathway resurfacing biannual project, non-discretionary, so every other year we're funding this project to maintain those pathways.
Yeah, so I guess the request is, if we can get. Okay,
Let's do our comments. Haven't given you a chance to ask questions yet.
Yes, so I was curious about the economic analysis. Does it include anything about mode shift? Like if we had fewer vehicles, there would be less pavement wear?
It doesn't go into that level of analysis. That would be left to the cities to evaluate that. So for example, the evaluation would be a snapshot of the road condition. And then the economic analysis would take those conditions and apply what they would predict as an appropriate treatment. So for example, for a good road, it would be a seal. So for example, a slurry seal like you would see on like we saw on Castro. For something that is in fair condition, it might be taking off 1 inch or 2 inches of pavement and then applying a surface on top of that. I think the equivalent of that would be if the city would be having some sort of predictive element of if we are going to get mode shift, we could expect that the streets would last longer, or maybe we would anticipate that they would maybe wear differently. Really, the wearing of a street is really dictated by trucks, and a lot of times the wearing is specifically dictated by large heavy vehicles like garbage trucks. So in some ways, the mode shift helps with our transportation goals, helps with our safety goals, but it doesn't necessarily help with pavement condition because a lot of those are it's not switching from your Honda to a bike. It's really, we still have those, VTA buses and the garbage trucks and those heavy vehicles that are dictating a lot of the wear and tear.
Okay, thanks, Vic. I thought so, but just
Yeah,
wanted to.
thank you.
And then over time, hopefully, we will have more bike lanes. So I had asked about, trails, and I guess that's a different department, but if the way to measure is to drive around and assess the condition, and if bike lanes might have different rates of wear or might be more susceptible to root lift because they're closer to trees or whatever, what is the plan to measure them, or is there one?
No, that's fair. That's a good question. So the driving around assessment, that every 2-year assessment, is a beginning point for staff. So after that after that report is provided by MTC and the consultant, the staff takes that, looks at what the identified priority streets were, and then we actually go out and do a physical assessment. So my group will essentially divvy up the street segments that were identified for treatment, and we physically go out there and document issues that we see ourselves. So it could be on top of that we see that there's some stop bars that didn't get noticed, or there are gutter pans that are uplifted. There could be drainage issues, like an area drain that might be out of compliance, doesn't have the right covering or something like that. So we do that, and then we share it with ourselves. So we do a second round of assessment on top of that, and then from there we will come up with a list, and we work with Ed to kind of evaluate that list and identify it. Is it an equity issue? Are we covering a lot of our neighborhoods? Are we identifying the right streets? And then from there, we would create a kind of a recommended list that would go forward from there. So really the 2-year evaluation doesn't really identify all of those. We don't trust it to. We would have to go out there and assess it ourselves.
Okay, last question is, in the past, when I reported broken or uplifted pavement on the street, the response was super fast. And then this past August, I mean, it was just not just response, but like it got fixed. And then this past August, there's just root uplift in one area that's like hills. It's like enormous. I think biggest in Mountain View. And it hadn't been fixed. And I asked, and the reply was, everything's behind schedule, wait until next spring, summer. Is that the current status? Like things aren't happening until next spring, summer?
So for the record, I don't remember writing that response.
Okay.
What I can say is a lot of those root uplift complaints or issues are initially reviewed by our maintenance staff. So if it's a small root issue and something that we could attack right away, oftentimes that goes to our maintenance staff first. And then as we talked about, just like with sidewalks, if it gets worse and worse and progressively worse, and that it gets beyond the scope of what we could ask a maintenance group to actually perform, then it goes and becomes a capital project, and it goes into a different bucket for my group to do. Both of those groups, between this year and last year and going into 2 years ago, we did have a lot of staffing shortages across all of those groups. So my group went from 7 down to 4 about 18 months ago. So we're getting staffed up now, and we're catching back up to a lot of those projects, and we're working with Ed to combine projects and get as many of those delivered quickly as possible. The same thing is happening to our pavement maintenance group right now. They're going through some retirement phases. So some of those responses may be related to staffing shortages. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think Robert captured it well. The streets maintenance section gets pulled in many directions. And so at times when they have the capacity, they will respond, and they typically respond in a quick fashion. and we get positive praise for it. So there's two factors. One of them, delay response, is the staffing shortage that Robert mentioned. Another factor might be the weather. We're right at the cusp, like the downtown pavement project is late. It was on the borderline whether we can do it based on how cold it is and the weather. So a lot of times the pavement repairs, they won't do repairs during cold kind of winter. And so it might be a combination of both. Let's wait till the spring when the weather improves and we can pave and we're not going to have any issue with it. And when we have more staffing resources as well.
Thanks.
I think I have a couple of hopefully quick questions. The first one I wanted to ask was just to, I think I know what the current intention here is, but how are active transportation improvements incorporated into general pavement maintenance currently? I know there's some amount that is done. I don't know if that's changed since you last talked to us about this stuff.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So the pavement program identifies street segments for repair, for improvements. And then we work with transportation staff at the very beginning of those planning elements when we're going into design. We share with them the street segments, and then together we'll identify those areas that need treatment. A lot of the work, I work directly with Brandon on this, and he's pulling from his knowledge base as well as prior transportation studies. So if he sees that we're touching an area that was identified as a higher injury network or a pedestrian on a pedestrian network, he knows those areas right away, so he can identify recommended treatments. He can look at treatments that were recommended in the past and are they still appropriate. So those go in at the very beginning of our design process when we're basically writing the scope for the consultant. And if it gets in early, then we're not struggling to find the funding later or struggling with, well, we didn't know, those sorts of things. So that early planning really helps us. Even prior to that, when Brandon and Maria are working on an ATP plan that is an update, they bring in someone from my group to participate in that so we can understand where those needs are. And then aside from the paving program, there are non-paving driven transportation projects that really just focus in on delivering transportation improvements, active transportation improvements.
And again, unrelated to that, well, actually sort of related, but what's the rough frequency with which you guys aim to end up doing a significant repaving? Like, I know that if roads in better condition, it requires a less substantial of a project.
Right.
But how frequently do you aim to end up touching roads? I realize that would change if there's more funding for keeping the roads and other stuff good. But
Are you asking an ideal question? or-
I'm curious about both. Like what happens currently and what would be the goal?
Sure. So an ideal condition, you might be able to get 5 to 7 years out of a brand new street before you have to go back in there and put a seal down. So that's one indicator. Like if you can put all of your streets, all of your improved streets, your nice streets on the calendar, then that's a really good, well-maintained, well-funded program. We try to do that. We might be on more than the 5 to 10 year time frame. I haven't gone back to look at some of these streets that may have slipped off of that and graded myself on that curve. I think the PCI index of 70 kind of tells me holistically that we're not catching all of those that could be in good condition. As it slips further down, you would expect before it gets to the really poor condition, you should get at least 15 years out of your pavement as a life cycle. And you can live with that through 20 years. But after 20 years, you're kind of losing the integrity of the street. And no matter how many times you grind it down 2 inches, you've really worn out the base. It's aged to a point where the asphalt is cracking a lot. So those streets really just have to be reconstructed. It's that in-between point that I don't really have a good answer for in terms of how often do we grind a street? How often do we overlay a street with 1 or 2 inches? I don't think that that's been tracked through the Street Saver or I'd have to look at that.
Yeah, ultra high priority, mostly curious. Any other clarifying questions before we move to public comment?
I have one clarifying question as well, just thinking of these related projects. I assume you also would tie into public works for if there were, for example, sewer line work or other utility work that needed to be done, and see if it would make sense to do a major project at that time.
Yeah, correct. We do that. We work closely with our utilities group or from the Public Works Department. And actually, a nice way to do this is through our GIS mapping group. So our GIS mapping group has a dedicated staff person who works with Public Works on a regular basis. And we give them information, whether it's our street network or whether it's our planned utility network. And we can look at both of those maps. We can overlay those maps. And then we talk to each other. We have a regular check-in to see if we have planned projects that they need to sneak in and do some improvements before we get there, or on the other side, if they have planned projects that we could follow and give folks, so they don't have to look at a trench cut for 10 years. Well, we know that trench cut is there, and we can come in after that and do some repaving.
Great, thank you. That was it.
And when you're doing an assessment, I'm just going to add this as an aside. When you do an assessment, a trench cut is considered degradation in pavement. So no matter how good you do of a quality job, and it travels right, it feels good whether when you're traveling on a bike or in a car, it can become an area where the pavement can be degraded easier over time. So those things are things that we pay attention to.
That, we will move to public comment for this item. Do we have any public comment in the room? Do we have any online public comment?
Yes, we do. Bruce England, I'm gonna click to allow you to talk. Please unmute yourself and you will have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. Bruce England, Wisman Station Drive again. Gotta find my comments here. A sec. Okay, there's been a lot of stuff meanwhile, and I've lost my comments. Oh, here we go. Okay, yes. Oh, so I just want to note that the bike lane paving in some locations is not great, and it's not the same as the roadway conditions, and differentiating between what happens in the bikeways and what's happening on the roadway is worth noting. I think that's been discussed to some extent. Also, the difference between road paving and trail paving. On the bikeways, the paving seems to often have running down the middle of them like a seam, where the concrete and the paving comes apart. Maybe that's the gutter pan discussion again. One example location is at the south end of North Wisman Road and the whole of South Wisman Road on the west side of those stretches. I'm concerned that roadway paving seems to be considered the same as bikeway paving, even though they're not necessarily in the same condition between them, as I noted. Also, striping on Dana Street between Wisman Road and Calderon is quite poor in places. And this is even more critical given the speed limit along there being 35 miles per hour with no bike lane buffers or protection. We also saw multiple issues along Moore Park and Sylvan as part of the recent city-sponsored walking tour as part of the input for the ATP. And yet I see no planned improvements in those areas. I have logged Ask Mountain View tickets on all of these sorts of details. Also, Robert, would you mind going back to your slide about sidewalk conditions for a second? I wanted to note something on there. Are you able to do that without my timer being in the way?
Can we
Bruce, make your
pause?
comment, and
I'm sorry?
make your comment, Bruce, and he can pull it up if he can.
Okay, well, I'll try to do this without seeing the photo, but it just shows the ADA ramp going at a 45-degree angle. And maybe, Robert, you comment on that and I just missed it, but obviously that's kind of an awkward angle for people who need that ADA feature. And I know you know that, so I'm just spotting that. because it was in the photo. And also the the tire tracks around that corner there are going so close to that ramp that it's nuts. You know, it's like cars are just basically going over those ramps because they can. And I do hope that when those types of corners are improved, that that is a vertical curb there. And so cars will no longer be able to hop up the curb just because it's as low as it is currently in this example location. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Further,
We do not.
all right, with that, we'll close public comments for item 6.1, and we will move to committee comments. I don't believe we are looking for any sort of motion or the such, so just general comments if you have them. Member Dominic.
Okay. Okay, so thank you for the presentation. I always learn new things. I guess I understand the measuring the cost in terms of money that will need to be spent in the future to bring the pavement up to some level. I wish that there was a way to measure cost in terms of the injury and discomfort inflicted on people. I think the pavement can get pretty bad and people in vehicles, you know, might suffer some monetary damage if their car rims get bent or something like that. But for bicyclists and pedestrians, it might mean falling off their bike, or you know, if their tire gets wedged, or it might be a twisted ankle if they trip or something like that, and that's not measured. And I think it would be good to measure it and further somehow prioritize it. I'm just thinking of that example that keeps getting mentioned about, I think it was Sweden, where they started clearing the snow off the sidewalks first because people were slipping and falling. And it feels like with the repavement, with the pavement management program here, it's very much still cars first. And then, yes, we'll also do something about sidewalks, which, you know, is great, but it was a little bit gray to me how much it's still going to be driven by people filing Ask Mountain View tickets, as opposed to, let's just notice that there's no ramp here and put one in because it's downtown and it's like Hope and Villa or Dana or something, and it's just clearly missing, and we don't need to have a big study. We should just, you know, maybe put it in. And then for trails, I mean, I don't, maybe this is then for community services, but I feel like they're even more vulnerable to trucks. When there's the pond restoration project, the trail gets ripped up. I don't know, for some of the Google building construction, they get ripped up. Even when hunters go out there with trucks, I don't know, potentially that's like where that the trails aren't really designed to bear. Maybe when the PG&E trucks are there, I don't know if it would be possible to incorporate that cost into those when non-bike ped users are using the trails somehow. And then for, I don't know if it would be, I know it's, maybe this is more like the work plan, but it would be great to hear from, I guess, community services about the trails. I feel like we hear about the roads regularly, and that's great, but obviously, like, we also care about the trails, and I don't know, you know, apparently there's a biannual fix. It would be great to hear about that. It would be nice. And then for the project list, thank you very much for answering the clarifying question. I hope that I assume that there's things like asking the immediate neighborhood because of potentially parking removal, etc. I feel like that's pretty local usually, and for some reason, again, like people who use this street to park their cars are prioritized over people who might also be part of the community, like they walk or bike through there. Maybe they're actually interacting more in that space than someone who just parks their car. So it'd be nice to give the community more voice for those projects potentially. But yeah, thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you. Second, pretty much everything Member Adamic has said. Just really appreciate the presentation and learning, and I think this is hopefully is taken as a compliment. I'm enjoying all that I'm learning from you, and I would like to also, like Member Adamic mentioned, learn more about when these trail projects are happening. Similar to yourself, when I've used those trails and I've seen if PG&E or other workers are out parking their big heavy trucks on those trails, that there will be severe degradation at that time. I did also want to just compliment when I have filed tickets for roof uplift on sidewalks. Those have been responded to very quickly, and that is greatly appreciated before any injuries occur there. So, and similarly, when I know you're talking about that those trenches are dug, Farley is one example of that, where the repairs are great, and after a couple of big heavy storms, riding the bike gets to be a little bit more adventuresome on those, and I have appreciated, sometimes it's the city, and sometimes the city has to work with whoever made that trench to go fix it. And I appreciate that you go drive that, because for me as a resident, I don't know who did the damage, and you all do, and I appreciate you following it up. I thought this was very informative. I wish you all had more money, and I know we've also learned before from staff that, you know, when we do add things like bike lanes, that is cheaper because you don't have to do as much reinforcement. Ideally, trucks are not driving in the bike lanes. Ideally, you can't guarantee it, obviously, but so I really appreciate that work, and I appreciate the coordination here between the projects, and it sounds like Ask Mountain View is, I have found it has worked well, and it sounds like it's your preferred way for finding about trouble spots, because obviously city staff can't be everywhere all at once. And that I thought was great. Those were all my comments. Just more, I wish you had more money to do more. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, go ahead.
so my comment is, it's excellent presentation, good information. I guess I'd like to see trails brought up to the same level, and other maybe paseos and other gutter pans maybe that seem to fall through the cracks, as it were, unintended. You know, having a consistent view of the data with all pavement surfaces or all sidewalk surfaces or all signages would be my ask. You know, and I do know that trails degrade quicker because often the layer of base rock is much thinner, sometimes non-existent, and one trip with a heavy vehicle during certain soil conditions can really degrade something. And just having ways to recognize that, or do a better job of putting base before we build trails so they have a longer life. I think it's all to the higher indexes that we'd like to experience.
Good job. I will largely echo your comment. One narrow thing, which I don't know if it's even a comment, but I believe Member Fenwick was asking about specific roads, and that diagram that Robert showed on the presentation is available on the city's website. If you follow the link in the agenda and then follow another link on that page, you'll see every individual street from the last assessment. Have to go one more link deeper.
One more click. Thank you.
And just in general with this, the reason I'm most interested in this is when we can make safety improvements to the roads at the same time as we're repaving them. So I look forward to seeing us continue to do that. It's been great, even seeing some projects recently that have started to make simultaneous improvements. So that's been awesome. It does sound like maybe we should try to see if we can find some way to ask for a presentation from community services at some point about how they manage the trails. Since I know this has been very informative the past couple of years now, I think, when we hear about how the pavement works. So, yeah, with that, is there anything else anyone wants to cover before we move on?
Sorry, I hate to double dip. I just wanted to, reminded me also with that picture with the ADA curb. That's something I do mention a lot, that where possible space, infrastructure makes sense, having separate curb cuts for each direction you expect a wheelchair or low vision user to go. Those ones that go in the middle, I know have cost savings for the city to create, that they are not great for people using wheelchairs, strollers, or who have low visibility, because it puts you in the wrong place. But also, I think this is part of the general plan, when I've heard from the active transportation planning as well, that that picture happened to show a turning radius that encourages cars to take fast turns. And I believe in general, when you're working at repaving and where you might be redoing the sidewalk, I believe you are working on making corners that maybe don't encourage people to turn so fast. So I appreciate that as well, taking those into consideration when you have the opportunity to change those turning radiuses. So thank you. That was my only other comment. Thank you.
With that, we will close item 6.1 and we will move to item 6.2, which is the transportation legislative updates. And I believe we have a staff presentation here as well.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I don't see it on the screen. Okay. Hi, I'm Maria Hooch-Barrett, Transportation Manager. And the last couple of years, we've had a flurry of legislation regarding transportation and also housing. And last year, we brought some updates on legislation that was passed that year. Hopefully this will work. There we go. So this is from 2022. Relating to complete streets, enforcement, safety, parking, and transit-oriented uses. We presented most of these in December 2022. The ones that are in italics, we didn't actually present, but I can provide more information if you want that as well. So this year we again had a lot of new legislation that was passed at the state level, covering some similar areas. And I'm going to be providing a lay summary of this legislation. We have not yet had received legal input on the applicability of these new laws to our operations and projects. So in terms of complete streets legislation, there were 3 new pieces of legislation. The one we're most excited about is AB 971. This is something that we worked on as staff, and we found an assembly member who was willing to bring this to the capital for us, to the state legislature. And what SB 971 does is it amends the definition of transit-only traffic lanes to match the California Vehicle Code section 40240. What this means in terms of our purposes is that it enables us to operate the bus lanes that we're developing along Shoreline Boulevard with various types of transit buses. So that includes transit that it does not have a fare, like our community shuttle and the MV Go. It also includes services that are operated by private or non-profit entities like the Mountain View Transportation Management Association, and it also includes private shuttles that have really high occupancy as well, in addition to the regular fixed route services provided by VTA. So this was helpful for us and becomes effective next year. The next one on the list is SB 695, which requires Caltrans to provide information on their website and also to the California Transportation Commission on what projects they've done on the state highway system. And so this would become effective in 2025. And at that stage, they would need to provide information on all their projects since 2018. And then for future years, they would provide an annual update. It is required to be on the website by January 1st and then presented to the Commission by April 1st. AB 413 is the next on the list, and this is a law that prohibits people from stopping, standing or parking, motorists from stopping, standing or parking their vehicle within 20 feet of a crosswalk, either unmarked or marked, or within 15 feet of a crosswalk with curb extensions. It's effective this coming year, 2024, but for the first year, cities can only give warnings for violations unless the pavement in this area is also marked or signed. And then it's fully effective 2025. So we have two new laws relating to enforcement, and both of them are pilot programs. So the first one is the bike lane enforcement device pilot, which allows cities and other local agencies to install front-facing devices to photograph parking violations in the bike lanes. And this is similar to, there's an existing legislation that allows transit vehicles to do this for violations in the transit, in like the bus lanes, but this would allow parking enforcement vehicles to have similar devices for the bike lanes. And it also allows agencies to issue violations within 15 days based on these photos. The law also includes some other information relating to privacy. So if there's no violation, then they have to destroy the files within 15 days. And if there is like evidence of a violation, then they have to destroy the files within 6 months, and they're allowed to retain the evidence for up to 30 days. So there's a number of different kind of qualifications and caveats like that. There's also waivers for indigent people as well. The next one is the long-awaited AB 645, which is the speed camera pilot. And this involves 6 cities of San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Glendale, and it allows them to implement speed cameras for this pilot period. And there's a number of other strategies that they need to do in conjunction with this. They need to have a policy, they need to do an impact report, they need to have a public information campaign and provide warning notices and provide guidelines as well. And an evaluation also at the end of the safety and economic impacts. And the law also outlines processes for, issuing notices and administrative hearings and that sort of thing, appeals, that sort of thing. So several of those laws affect safety, and there are two other laws that relate to safety as well. They're both safety studies. So SB 381 requires the Meta Transportation Institute to conduct a study on the safety of electric bikes and to report back by 2026. And the AB 251 requires the California Transportation Commission to convene a task force to study the effects of vehicle weight. So over time, vehicle weights have gone up, as you can see in this thing that I pulled from Bloomberg, and they're required to study the relationship between vehicle weight and safety outcomes, especially for vulnerable users such as pedestrians and bicyclists, and also the relationship between vehicle weight and degradation to roadways, and to look at the costs and benefits of imposing a vehicle weight related fee for vehicles. And that is due in 2026, January 1st, 2026. Next, we have 3 new laws relating to parking. The first one is AB 894. And this one has a couple of different parts. The first part is effective in 2024. And it requires agencies like cities to allow entities to have shared parking agreements. And if they submit a shared parking agreement, they have an analysis that shows that parking's underutilized. And by underutilized, they specify that means that 80% or lower during the period when it would be shared. And also some information on the benefits. The law also requires agencies to allow that shared parking under these agreements be counted towards parking requirements for both existing and new development. And it also has some notification requirements. So if a city or an agency does not does not have a shared parking ordinance, they're required to notify owners within 300 feet of a shared parking agreement and to hold a public meeting if it's requested. And generally, the distance for these agreements would be about 2,000 feet, but there is also a situation where if there's a shuttle that is frequent, so like an airport shuttle, then it could be further than 2,000 feet for those shared parking arrangements. The second part of this law is effective on June 30th, and this requires that public agencies, as well as private owners and lessors, need to assess the feasibility of shared parking to replace or reduce new parking construction if either public funds are being used to build new parking structure like a garage or also surface lot, or if state funds are being used to fund the associated development associated with that parking. The next law is AB 1317, and this relates to unbundled parking. It requires owners of residential properties to unbundle the price of parking from the price of rent. And it applies to a number of counties, including Santa Clara County, so obviously us, and developments with 16 or more units. It exempts situations where the parking is functionally and kind of physically integrated with the individual unit. So a row house or a townhouse is exempt from this, and also 100% affordable housing is also exempt, and the reason being related to federal tax law. And that's effective 2025. A third parking related law is SB 712, which requires or prohibits landlords from prohibiting tenants from owning a personal micromobility device and storing it in their house if that device meets basic safety standards, unless the landlord provides secure long-term storage. And what I found interesting about this one also is that it provides a new definition of personal micromobility devices beyond all the definitions that we already have for these devices. And this is effective 2024. And then finally, we have, I wanted to mention that there was a administrative guidelines. The administrative guidelines were put out by the Metropolitan Transportation Commission for their transit-oriented communities policy. The policy was passed the previous year, 2022, and then in 2023, they provided some administrative guidance. It has 4 sections. The first is relating to the density of residential and commercial development. Second is about affordable housing. Third is parking management. And fourth is station access and circulation. There's a lot of details of how to analyze and how to come into compliance with the policy. And we will be coming back to you with our initial analysis on number 4 at a later date. So from what I can tell, I think these new laws are consistent with the city's strategic priorities of promoting transit and safe active transportation options that reduce single occupant vehicle trips and traffic and that increase walking and biking. And I hope this has been informative, and we look forward to seeing the fruit of these new laws.
All right, does the committee have any clarifying questions?
I have 2 questions. Do you happen to have any background? Oops. Yes. Do you happen to have any background on or AB 645, the speed camera law? If that, I have a pretty good guess why those specific cities were chosen. I believe they're the most popular cities we have in the state. But is there anything about where the city of Mountain View interest in pursuing this yeah, is this something we're watching? Is this something, what? Without getting into comments, yes, are we watching how that develops for consideration potentially in the future for incorporating speed cameras in Mountain View?
Yes, this is something that we've been watching with great interest. There's a lot of requirements for that law that make it a little less interesting to participate in the pilot. But we're interested in seeing the outcome of the pilot.
Great, and then my other question is on the vehicle weight safety study, that was AB 251. There is, so this is a specific California law, even though, and to study this specifically here, even though there is already, as like this Bloomberg chart and a lot of, I think SAS for engineering, Society of Automotive Engineers, all already know that this is true. So this is just our own data, or do you understand like how this is different from existing studies about the weight safety study?
Well, I think the last point here is the key difference. Understanding the cost associated with the impacts and what that would mean for a fee.
Great, thank you for that difference. I appreciate that.
I guess I have one question which I had missed in reading the report originally was, do you know, and this is maybe the stuff that just requires the city to examine stuff more carefully, but does AB 894, the one that applies to the second section of it that applies to what the city has to do studies if it is using public funds for new parking structures. I glanced at the bill text just now, and it doesn't have a whole lot more information than what was written here. This next slide on AB 894.
Oh, this one.
Do you know if that ends up applying to the proposed parking garage in lot, which I think it's 4, but I can't remember, in the downtown area? It may or may not meet the date cutoff. I don't know how that date cutoff is.
Yeah, I think this is something we need to look into.
And any other questions?
Yeah, a couple, I mean, it seems like it applies to occupied buildings, which would then trigger the shared parking, I guess, as opposed to just parking itself.
There's separate clauses.
So, but my questions are on the mobility, parking is required at home. Did you mention businesses, or was that already required for businesses?
This was focused on the issue of tenants not allowing, landlords not allowing tenants to own a personal micro mobility device. So it's really focused on residential.
Okay, so a business can still prohibit them from being parked on site, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the law is relating to businesses, but this was just focused on residential.
So, and then I guess back on the parking, it requires agencies to allow developers, but does not force them to use shared parking.
Correct.
With that, if we have no further clarifying questions, we'll move to public comment for item 6.2. Do we have any in-person public comment?
No. Oh, sorry.
And we have any online? I take it that means we have no online public comment. Right. Great. We'll close public comment for item 6.2. Do we have any committee comments on the legislative update? Member
I
Donnelly.
just wanted to say thank you. This is very informative.
I second that. It's very hugely informative. Also, very grateful we're finally, state of California is finally allowing, as an experiment, speed cameras. They've been incredibly effective in Europe and other countries for many, many years. And we know, we had many conversations before and also came up with a CTC update yesterday with the speed limits and the difficulty of enforcing that. I wanted to share as well, which maybe it's going to come up later in staff comments. I did appreciate my question for you back last time being answered to the Council Transportation Committee about how Palo Alto lowered their speed limits to 25 miles per hour. They just did it. But they have the same complexities with enforcement that already exist. But I think hopefully having three major cities near us that would be implementing these speed cameras may just in general, hopefully slow people down. We know speed kills. And I have had to get special permission about storing bicycles inside of an apartment before, so I think that's also really great. Because if you don't need special permission, you're more likely to have a thing and you don't want to leave it on your porch, right? So that is really great, and I really appreciate the weight study as well, that again, both from our pavement management update, we know the heavy vehicles also cost the city of Mountain View, and the quality of both our bike lanes and our roads for our users and our trails, as we've discussed as well, with when they're on the trails. And just the speed, the heavier the vehicle, and what much likely if a pedestrian is hit, that they will survive. So those are awesome. Really appreciate the update, and really hope Mountain View keeps watching and can incorporate some of these changes in the future if they're successful pilots.
I will, appreciate the update. I hope pilot program, the speed cameras works out well, and then it's simpler for us to implement some locally. Yeah.
I'll make one comment. I think the weight was motivated a lot by cities losing gas tax revenue when there's a high proportion of electric vehicles. So it kind of makes strange bedfellows. I'm not sure it was really about safety, at least when it was originally conceived. Because grill shape is much more important for safety, at least of pedestrians and bikes, than the weight of the vehicle in most cases. So it's kind of a revenue measure for a large extent, hopefully helping Robert out since we have a lot of electric vehicles in the city.
Well, in that case, with nothing else, we will close item 6.2. And that will move us to item 6.3, the VTA PPAC update. We had a written report. I'm not sure if there was anything that should be called out. A summary would not be objected to. Oh.
Shoot. Okay, sorry. I should have been.
Member Adamic.
Okay. Let me look. Okay, so just briefly, there are new bike safety videos the scripts were developed by SVBC, but VTA did all the production on how to bring your bike on VTA e-bike safety and navigating bike infrastructure. Then the county staff report mentioned several intersection improvements, which you can check out. And then there's a really huge document on measuring level of service on intersections throughout the county, which you can look at. And it seemed like level of service has not gone down, even though some of the intersections in Mountain View are like grade E, like El Camino and Grant, unstable flow at or near capacity levels with poor levels of comfort and convenience. So, but it hasn't been getting worse. And then interestingly, there are like a whole 20 locations, like, you know, for of course, for cars, you have it for each like main road segment, et cetera, but there were 20 spots, none of them in Mountain View, where they measured, they counted bikes and pedestrians. And so this was comparing 2021 to 2018. And bike traffic had increased, but pedestrian traffic had decreased. And there wasn't really any explanation, but hopefully it means at least the bike improvements may be making some difference. And then there was some shift in, there was some some funding that was and checklists and so on. You can read about that if you want. And then the meeting was interrupted because the building had to be evacuated. And then this was the best part. People who had biked or taken public transit could just leave. That wasn't me. I drove. We had to wait around an hour while the building was cleared and secured and so on. So, yeah.
All right. Any questions regarding the VTA PPAC update?
I have to ask, why was the building evacuated?
There was some it turned out to be nothing. There was like a threat, anonymous source
relayed some kind of threat.
And the second question is, will the meeting be continued or are the remaining agenda items just postponed till the next meeting?
We didn't get that far.
All right,
We'll find out, yeah.
to be announced. Okay, thank you.
All right, do we have any public comment on the VTA BPAC update?
In the room.
No, any online?
Very entertaining.
And none online.
All right, then we will close public comment for item 6.3, VTA BPAC update. Any committee comments on VTA BPAC update?
Just thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the written report. It
Yeah.
helps me kind of absorb the information. So thank you.
All right, with that, we will close item 6.3, the VTA BPAC update. And we'll move to item 6.4, the BPAC fiscal year 2023 to 2024 work plan.
That's interesting. Thank you, Chair. Brandon White, Active Transportation Planner. So per usual, I will go through our approved work plan and talk about all of the highlighted items, which are things that have changed. So nothing has changed here on the first page, second page is the same. And then as we reach here, promote and participate in events, we have a monthly Mountain View bike ride, which was to Monster Bash. So it's very well attended with kids meeting at the library and being escorted by adults and candy passed out to them, bringing them to the Monster Bash event, which was also very well attended. We had bike fillet this time. We had a bike mechanic and those types of things as well. So it was a well-attended event. And then we just completed the annual legislative review. And those are all the things that changed. Now I'll talk about the tentative agenda list. Tentative agenda list shows the things that were moved up to this meeting, legislative update, election of new chair, vice chair. And then it shows things that were moved to the January meeting, which is the NTC transportation. Oh my gosh.
Transportation, all right.
Thank you,
Transit-oriented
oriented communities. Yes. Policy analysis, which is coming, and then the local road safety plan. No other changes to the tentative agenda list, and that is all I have.
Do we have any clarifying questions on the work plan or towel? Do we have any public comments? Now, public comment on item 6.4, the fiscal, the work plan. Anything in the room? Anything online?
No.
Then close the public comment for item 6.4. Any committee comments on the work plan or towel? Member Dominic.
Okay, I'm not sure this is the right spot, but this isn't where we ask for more things we want to do.
Typically, that would be when we do the draft work plan for the year, right?
When is that?
Usually, yeah.
Should be on the towel, I think.
February 28th.
Yes, February 20th.
Okay, I will save it.
Great. If there's no other committee comments, then we can close item 6.4. We now have on the agenda, item 6.5, the election for the 2024 chair and vice chair. This was moved up to this meeting to free up, because the BPAC member composition is not changing from the January meeting when it would normally be held. Vice Chair Stone is not able to make it today. I am inclined to move that we postpone this item to the next BPAC meeting, so that the entire membership of the BPAC can be present. So I'm making a motion.
Can I ask a question? Did Vice Chair Stone leave any messages
like being willing to be nominated?
Is that a question?
Yes.
Wait, he didn't officially do that.
I got information from him.
You have that written.
I spoke to him today.
Okay, so perhaps
I
we
believe
should
we
have the
could.
information.
I'm just saying I would prefer that we do it with everyone present. I'm saying we could do it right now. But I would prefer that we do it when everyone is here. Since I don't think there's a strict need that we do it today.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What if we're not all here at our next meeting?
Is it expected that we would not all be here at the next meeting?
Life happens.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
it's,
gonna mention the bylaws.
so I will say just from while there's a motion on the floor, so the
Well, not the
discussion-
seconded, so.
but I think discussion is okay from a rules. I would not be against holding elections with vice chair absent. My concern would be that our next meeting is January
January.
31st, and I almost didn't make tonight because I had complete total laryngitis last week and I could not speak a word. But I can speak, so I'm here. But life happens, so if there was an indication of willingness to serve and interest in the other members to nominate, I would be fine with also going forward or deferring. That's my thoughts.
Can I say something? Okay, so a couple of things. I confirmed with the city clerk that it's acceptable to vote in the absence of a member, and if the committee prompts staff, to find out if, the person is willing, we can do that. On the other hand, we realized after publishing the agenda that the bylaws actually say that we're supposed to have the laws after January 1st. We didn't realize that, and we thought it would be timely to do it now, given that member Adamic was reappointed, so there would be no change in membership. So there's those two things to weigh up.
Right, so the BPAC bylaws assert that we should have a new chair and vice chair elected before the January 1st.
After January 1st.
Oh, it should happen after January 1st.
Yes, we hadn't looked into the
Okay.
bylaws on that previously, and yeah.
With
Well,
with that, it seems like probably, I would be happy to second your motion.
all right then. Then if there's no further discussion on the motion, let's take a vote on the motion. All in favor of postponing the item until the January meeting when we can both comply with the bylaws and hopefully have everyone present.
Aye.
Can I make a
Oh, hang on,
comment?
who was the second?
Valerie,
Oh, okay, sorry.
If the committee is interested in changing the bylaws, we can consider that for the future. However, that would require time and effort. So if you want to provide direction for us to do that, so that this type of thing could happen, we could consider that.
Mike was just say we can survive in the future.
it's normally a fairly fast process.
Yeah. All right.
And also, I think technically that I don't get stamped, my reappointment doesn't get stamped until December 6th, so. Right, there's just a subcommittee that would have been favorable, but. I
I
thought
see.
that
So you're not
it was
officially
council.
reappointed until the
Yeah.
6th.
I see.
Anyways, since the item isn't actually happening, I think that means we don't have to do public comment or the such. I don't think we have any public comment on this. So that moves us into item 7.1, staff comments or announcements. I assume we have a presentation as normal.
Yes. Click the button, click a choice, okay. So we had two recent projects occur in the last 30 days or so. The first project was Eagle Scout project for Landell's Elementary School, Safe Routes to School. And you can see a picture here of those scouts completing their project. And if you walk around the safe routes surrounding Landell's Elementary, you will see blue and yellow line print footprints on the sidewalk leading you in a safe route to school. Then we also have Capital Projects Improvement Manager Robert Gonzalez here, who can talk a little bit about the Castro resurfacing, and he will educate us on what a COAT seal is.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. I appreciate that. So let me back up just a little bit and talk about the interim PEDMAL improvements as a whole and the related treatment, the pavement treatment. Staff has a multi-department effort going on right now with interim improvements to the pedestrian mall. There was a lot of interest in brushing up what downtown looked like and making it nicer for visitors. So we reached out to the business community in terms of timing. And one of the first things we needed to do was the coat seal. Businesses understandably wanted their outdoor dining available throughout the summer. We weren't necessarily ready to deliver it during the height of the summer anyway, so that worked out for us as well. Businesses were interested in this being delivered after the wine festival. Is that right? So we accommodated that. Businesses were also interested in asking us to wait till after Halloween, so we've accommodated that. So we are in that position now of fighting against Mother Nature. So a coat seal and other seals work best when air temperatures are a certain level. We had some touch and miss low temperatures, early morning temperatures were pretty low, but we managed to get the coat seal down last week. The picture shows some of the efforts weren't perfect in terms of keeping people off the pavement. So that cleanup is still happening. So we have the contractor, we're still talking to them about actually cleaning some of that up. So hopefully that some of that gets taken care of so it looks nicer at the end of next week. The coat seal is in that same family of treatments as a slurry seal. It goes on a little bit differently. It has a little bit less graininess to it. A slurry seal can actually have some more total solids in it, so there's a little bit more friction to it. This is a pedestrian mall, so it's an appropriate treatment. It's very similar to what you might put on a parking lot. So that's the history of the coat seal that Brandon was asking for. Next steps in terms of what we're delivering would be the barriers for the restaurants. Those are on order. My understanding is that we have 16 restaurants that have applied for and received a permit for outdoor dining. We have another, I think, 20-ish restaurants out there that have either yet to apply or are in the process of applying for and getting a permit. So barriers are forthcoming. Along with that, along with the paving, we are going to be applying striping down the middle of the street. So there will be a 16-foot wide, I think it's 16. There will be a pedestrian pathway in the middle of the street. So we'll have a designated area for restaurants, pathway, and then restaurants on the other curve. So that's forthcoming as well in the next few weeks. And then following that, we are actively looking at options for a pavement treatment, more of an artistic treatment for the pavement that would go through the Visual Arts Committee. That's going through the Visual Arts process, and I believe that's on their agenda for January. So all of those things are in the works still.
Recent events. As I mentioned before, Monster Bash. We had the Caltrans El Camino Real meeting to see the mayor there, and our own capital improvement program manager listening intently in the background to the El Camino Real improvements project. And then what most of you want us to talk about probably is baby Darren here, 9 pounds, 2 ounces, healthy baby boy, November 27th at around 8 p.m. So they're still in the hospital, right? But everything is good. Almost done. All right, upcoming events. We have December 2nd at 10 a.m. This is Saturday. Day Worker Center ride. We had this last year and people brought donations. This year they're looking for gift cards to Walmart or La Playa Market, or you can make a donation directly via their PayPal. This information should be. And then we do have a listening session. So active transportation plan, downtown analysis listening session. So what's working, what's needs improvement from a walking and biking perspective in the downtown area. And of course, this is with the changes at the Ped Mall, this is particularly important, how we route bicycles through the downtown, not through the Ped Mall. Then on December 16th, we have another bike ride. This is a holiday ride, which is a joint ride with Palo Alto. That will start at 5:15 from the transit center and ride out to Christmas Tree Lane, Palo Alto, which I'm told has got a lot of lights and things like that to see, and then right back to Mountain View. And then the final thing is a question for you all. So not so much an action necessarily, but something if you want to discuss here, you can. Moving the BPAC start time from 6:30 to 6 p.m. That is not in the bylaws. We are allowed to. That's the only reason we do this other thing, because I was checking to see if we could do this, which we are allowed to do. So that's all that I have to present for staff updates.
I have one more thing. So the other thing is that PTA has a Valley Transportation Plan community meeting. Also on December 6th, it's at 6:30 at the community center.
Okay. We'll give us this chance to discuss the timing question in one moment. Clarifying questions on the staff presentation.
I have a question. Are there, normally we see Ask MV updates in,
Sorry, I should have mentioned that. I have not had the capacity to get that.
and that is fine. I just wanted to make, I wasn't sure if it was, because of the holidays, it may be less stuff coming in or busy is fine. That's
It is what it is.
Fine.
Additional questions? Right. Are there any in-person public comments on the staff presentation? Are there any online public comments on the staff presentation? No. Okay. I think it's, well, let's start with the 6:30 to 6 question. I guess a clarifying question is there a particular impetus for the 6:30 to 6? Asking that.
It's easier for staff to be done sooner. It's also potentially going to, although I think there's room for just, debate on this, increase the amount of people that stay through the entire meeting if it ends a bit sooner. But moving into 5:30 probably is too much, not giving people enough time. We were asking if we could explore the 6, if that is enough time, especially for you BPAC members, because you have to be here in person, and we're cognizant of that, and you have other jobs. So those are the reasons that we were thinking.
Anyone here have strong thoughts on this? Or any thoughts, I guess?
I have weak thoughts, just because the VTA VPAC's at 6:30. I think I'm more likely to show up to either meeting on time consistently if they're the same. That's very weak. Also, I really like grabbing dinner before, and it's like if it starts at 6, then I'm eating not super early, but somewhat early. It's already early. So I don't know. I have a slight preference for 6:30.
I have a similar slight preference. It's challenging as it is to have a meal and get here on time. When I used to take transit to work and come here, y'all often had, people had to deal with me with my dinner here in the room. That's not offensive to people. I can always go back to doing that. And that is harder when I took public transport to get here at earlier would be challenging, but I don't currently take public transport to work. So.
No significant ones either way.
Personally, I might have a very slight preference towards earlier since it means ending earlier, but I also do run into I can't get here at 6. It's just that much less time to eat dinner. I have to pay a bit more attention to the clock at work. I'm not seeing a strong overall preference.
We maybe say we try it for January and February and then take feedback in the committee comments at the end of the February meeting and see how it's worked out. That would give us a couple meetings to try it.
I think that's reasonable. That also means the meetings start when the sun is still up, so it's light to get here. In January and February.
Sorry.
I realize this makes
also
the
like
things less
to-
consistent.
Okay, logistically, it's just harder because I pick up my son from tennis at 6. So. And
It's a harder constraint than I personally apply with even at 6:30.
yeah, I don't really know what to do.
My inclination then would be to say keep it at 6:30. If that constraint removes itself in another couple months.
It might once it's like daylight again. Cause then he can bike.
And maybe my second proposal might be that we reconsider this in January.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Does it, because I don't hear
Yeah.
super strong objections, but just a
Yeah.
lot of logistics and maybe this
Yeah,
will give us.
this will
time.
get it on people's minds.
And then
Including
the
the-
other feedback member.
Including
Yes.
Member Stone, who's not here.
Yes. Who may himself have some stronger conflict, so. All right, did anyone have any other comments on items in the staff presentation, since there is other information there as well? All right, then with that, we'll move to item 7.2, committee comments. Do we have any unagendized committee comments? Member Atomic.
I would like to congratulate Member Barton on getting bike parking at Costco.
Thank you. It was just following up on what was required. It took time, but it's there now.
I'm gonna try that.
And support of several staff along the way, just explaining the process and ones that obviously work with Costco to make sure it happens.
Lovely.
Glad it was done.
Two hopefully smaller comments. One, I just had the great pleasure of visiting Hawaii last week, and in Waikiki, they have in the last year introduced scrambles in high pedestrian areas. And the Uber drivers, the taxi drivers hate them because they also instituted no right turn on red when these pedestrians are crossing. Pedestrians loved it. So it was interesting to have that experience and lots of walkable trails. And I was able to take my father around in a wheelchair so he could see a lot more of Hawaii than he could have if he was walking. So that was paved trails on the beach. So that are accessible. So that was awesome. And my second comment is, while it's not for a specific staff member here, but there's a dangerous sidewalk situation in my neighborhood. I filed a Ask MB and have called and followed up with the city multiple times over the last month, and the situation remains. And It has to do with a house construction project and I don't wanna put any specific person on call, call them out, my neighbor specifically for this meeting, but I think it's really an education issue and I feel like member Barton's cause for going after Costco bicycle parking, it feels like, something. So I'm trying to navigate that right now, but I am frustrated that there's for 1 month has been a dangerous pedestrian situation in my neighborhood that I have been unable to get addressed. So that's it. And it's not specifically related to sidewalks, it's a construction project.
I need to ask about some PG&E work on the sidewalk. But anyways, yeah.
So I'll make a follow-on comment about both of those, actually. So last Thanksgiving, or the day before Thanksgiving, I tripped on a steel plate that was unmarked, left out in the street for a plumber doing a trench. I talked to the homeowner, I was slightly injured. He said the plumber met with the code officer, who didn't really have concerns that it was unmarked, as I recall. I think came to the agreement there should be a vehicle parked over it perhaps, but that wasn't there, it got moved. So my general question is, and especially on bikes, I see PG&E plates, sometimes left with the edge revealed. My route home through Los Altos has a trench that sank 2.5 inches or 3 inches now. Is Ask Mountain View the best to ask code enforcement to go, or building inspectors to go tell the contractors to make good on what's either required or should be obvious for hazard? What's the recommendation on?
Yeah, for construction related things, I think Ask Mountain View is really good.
Yeah, I would make sure to add the address in question, because that will lead back to an active building permit.
And I'll add, a friend who works for a paving contractor suggested that they just file a claim with the city. If any damages, the city will pass that on to the contractor and the contractor pays without question.
Yeah, there's an ADA grievance process on the website as well.
Oh, well, I mean, actually for actual injuries or damage to your bicycle, because most contractors, I think, want to have good graces with the city, but I often see unmarked trenches for a day or two when the contractor thinks they don't need to bring back the steel plates or don't need cones or whatever, because it's going to be covered up the next day. And I've known of at least 3 collisions as a result. Palo Alto and Los Altos. So it's definitely a hazard.
That I don't think, well, I think there's no public comment on item 7.2, the committee comments. No, okay, great. Then we will close out item 7.2. We will set the date and time for the next meeting, which will be Wednesday, January 31st, 2024 in the new year at 6:30 p.m. And there are various meetings beyond that, which depending on discussion in January, may be moved up to 6 p.m. And with that, we can adjourn the November BPAC meeting, the final BPAC meeting in 2023, hopefully.
Thank you. James. Congratulations to Member Stone.
That is an acceptable excuse for missing the BPAC meeting.
Really?